Good morning, class. We are going to pick up on the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane. And last we read, Edward has a new home. He goes by the name Susanna now. And Wally's not really treating him that well, but he misses Nellie. And Nellie is the one who was really taking care of him in this new home. So what we are going to do is we are going to read 3 chapters today, chapter 11, 12, and 13. And in these chapters, they're shorter, so I know we'll be able to do it. But in these chapters, I want you to be paying attention to how Edward begins to transform in terms of his emotions. Do his emotions change in these chapters at all, and how so? So let's begin reading. Chapter 11. Edward ended up at the dump. He lay on top of orange peels, coffee grounds, rancid bacon, and rubber tires. The first night, he was at the top of the garbage heap, and so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in their light. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped when he was standing on top of the highest pile. He put his hands under his armpits and flapped his elbows. The man crowded loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I'm Ernest! Ernest, who is king of the world! How can I be king of the world? Because I'm king of the garbages, and garbages is what the world is made of. Ha ha ha! Therefore, I'm Ernest. Ernest, who is king of the world!" He cried again. Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made up of garbage, especially after his second day at the dump, when a load of trash was deposited directly on top of him. He lay there, buried alive. He could not see the sky. He could not see the stars. He could see nothing. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and exact his revenge. He would pick her up by the ears. He would bury her under a mountain of trash. But after almost 40 days and nights had passed, the weight and the smell of the garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts. And soon he gave up thinking about revenge and gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew that he was. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about a princess who had loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood that now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew that the answer to that question too. It was because he had not loved Abilene enough. And now she was gone from him. And he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone too. He missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of the time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, cackling and crowing about being king of the world. On his 180th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in a most unusual form. The garbage around him shifted, and the rabbit heard the sniffing and panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful buttery light of late afternoon shone in Edward's face. Chapter 12. Edward did not have much time to savor the light, for the dog suddenly appeared above him, dark and shaggy, blocking his view. Edward was pulled out of the garbage by his ears, dropped, and then picked up again, this time around the middle, and shaken back and forth with a great deal of ferocity. The little dog growled deep in his throat and then dropped Edward again and looked at him in the eye. Edward stared back. "Hey, get out of here, you dog!" It was Ernest, king of the garbages and therefore king of the world. The dog grabbed Edward by his pink dress and took off running. "That's mine! That's mine! All garbages is mine!" Ernest shouted. "You come back here!" But the little dog did not stop. The sun was shining, and Edward felt exhilarated. who, having known him before, would have thought that he could be so happy now, crusted over with garbage, wearing a dress, held in the slobbery mouth of a dog and being chased by a madman. But he was happy. The dog ran and ran until they reached the railroad track. They crossed over the tracks, and there, underneath a scraggly tree in a circle of bushes, Edward was dropped in front of a large pair of feet. The dog began to bark. Edward looked up and saw that the feet were attached to an enormous man with a long, dark beard. "What's this, Lucy?" "Oh, that's my dog's name," said the man. He bent and picked up Edward. He held him firmly around the middle. "Lucy," said the man, "I know how much you enjoy rabbit pie." Lucy barked. Yes, I know. Rabbit pie is a true delight, one of the many pleasures of our existence. Lucy let out a hopeful yip. "And what do we have here? What's so graciously delivered to me is definitely a rabbit. But the best chef in the world would be hard-pressed to make him into a pie," Lucy growled. "The rabbit is made of china, girl." The man held Edward closer to him. They looked each other in the eye. "You're made of china, aren't you, Malone?" He gave Edward a playful shake. "You are some child's toy, am I right? And you have been separated somehow from the child who loves you." Edward felt again the sharp pain in his chest. He thought of Abilene. He saw the path leading up to the house on Egypt Street. He saw the dusk descending and Abilene running toward him. Yes, Abilene had loved him. "So, Malone," said the man. He cleared his throat. "You are lost, that is my guess. Lucy and I are lost too." And the sound of her name, Lucy let out another yip. "Perhaps," said the man, "you would like to be lost with us. I have found it much more agreeable to be lost in the company of others. My name is Bull. Lucy, as you may have surmised, is my dog. Would you care to join us?" Bull waited for a moment, staring at Edward, and then with his hands still firmly around Edward's waist, the man reached one enormous finger up and touched Edward's head from behind. He pushed it so Edward looked as if Edward were nodding his head in agreement. "Look, Lucy, he's saying yes," said Bull. "Malone has agreed to travel with us. Isn't that swell?" Lucy danced around Bull's feet, wagging her tail and barking. And so it was that Edward took the road with a hobo and his dog. Chapter 13. They traveled on foot. They traveled in empty rail cars. They were also always on the move. "But in truth," said Bull, "we are going nowhere. That, my friend, is the irony of our constant movement." Edward rode in Bull's bedroll, slung over Bull's shoulder, with only his head and ears sticking out. Bull was always careful to position the rabbit so that he was not looking down or up, but instead forever looking behind him at the road they had just traveled. At night, they slept on the ground, under the stars. Lucy, after her initial disappointment about Edward being unfit for consumption, took a liking to him and slept curled up beside him. Sometimes she even rested her muzzle on his china stomach, and then the noises she made in her sleep, whimpering and growling and chuffing, resonated inside Edward's body. To his surprise, he began to feel a deep tenderness for the dog. During the night, while Bull and Edward and Lucy slept, Edward, with ever-open eyes, stared up at the constellations. He said their names, and then he said the names of the people who loved him. He started with Abilene, and then went to Nellie and Lawrence, and from there to Bull and Lucy, and then he ended again with Abilene. Abilene, Nellie, Lawrence, Bull, Lucy, Abilene. "See," Edward told Pellegrina, "I am not like the princess. I know about love." There were times, too, when Bull and Lucy gathered around the campfire with the other tramps. Bull was a good storyteller and an even better singer. "Sing for us, Bull," the men shouted. Bull sat with Lucy, leaning against his leg, and Edward balanced on his right knee, and he sang from somewhere deep inside himself. Just as Edward could feel Lucy's whimpers and growls resonate through his body at night, he could also feel the deep, sad sound of Bull's songs move through him. Edward loved when Bull sang. And he was grateful to Bull, too, for sensing that a dress was not the right kind of clothing for Edward. "Malone," said Bull one night, "it is not my desire to offend you or to comment negatively on your choice of garb, but I'm forced to tell you that you stick out like a sore thumb in that princess dress. And also, again, with no wish to offend you, that dress has seen better days." Nellie's beautiful dress had not fared well at the dump or its subsequent ramblings with Bull and Lucy. It was so torn and dirty and full of holes that it barely resembled a dress anymore. "I have a solution," said Bull, "and I hope that it meets with your approval." He took his own knit stocking cap and cut a big hole in the top of it and 2 small holes on the side of it, and then he took off Edward's dress. "Look away, Lucy," he said to the dog. "Let's not embarrass Malone by staring at his nakedness." Bull slid the hat over Edward's head and pulled it down and poked his arms through the smaller holes. "There you go," he said to Edward. "Now you just need some pants." The pants Bull made himself, cutting several red handkerchiefs and sewing them together so that they formed a makeshift covering for Edward's long legs. "Now you have proper outlaw look," said Bull, standing back to admire his work. "Now you look like a rabbit on the run." So that is it for today. Tomorrow you will read chapter 14, but there was a lot that happened in chapters 11, 12, and 13. I mean, Edward's found a new quote-unquote home, some new buddies, and I definitely see a change and transformation in his emotions. So keep that in mind as you answer today's questions, and I hope that you have a great Wednesday. Bye-bye, 4th grade.